please.
Thank you. Well, you've already taken a little bit of the wind out of my introductory remarks. They were to introduce the panelists. But seeing that the topic is engines for growth in Middle East and ASEAN, I think you'll all agree that after the brief introduction, this is the perfect setup and lineup of ladies and gentlemen to discuss that topic, representing as they do a lot, not all, but a lot of ASEAN and Middle East and the opportunities to be found there. Perhaps just brief idea on the lineup. I was trying to be super Teutonic and German, as I often am, and I was trying to sort of give a whole structure to this panel. My panelists, though, have all agreed that it's much better simply to have a conversation. So we shall try to have a conversation with each of them, perhaps giving us a few ideas initially. I have thought of a few things that we might be talking about, but of course you're perfectly welcome to jump right in and ask your questions from the audience. The only thing I would be mindful of is that we are on a tight schedule in as much as the Chief Executive will be speaking just after us, so we do need to finish on time. Thus, to step in and kick off straight away, Dean, maybe without further ado, can I ask you to share a few of your thoughts?
So, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to introduce myself or go straight to the... Long and short, my name is Dee Poon. I'm with Tessellation Group, and we are moving up in the world, you might say, with a manufacturing background in textile and apparel and operations in Vietnam. What we're really hoping to do as we go forward is transform our business from one that is manufacturing and OEM based into one that builds brands, and also one that incubates and invests in technologies, particularly around sustainability and digitization in the supply chain for the future of the world.
Thank you very much. Dato' Gan Kai, may I ask you perhaps to follow up?
Okay, Hong Kong's weather is so fine today. Why are we sitting all inside here? Well, very good reason. Thank you for inviting Hong Kong General Chamber to MeiCham, and it's a very good timing because MeiCham just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and for Malaysia, 1st January next year, Malaysia will be the chair of ASEAN. And at the same time, this year, 2024, Malaysia celebrated the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Malaysia. This spells fantastic good news going forward for the region and for Asia itself. I have a few points maybe we can take, Johannes, if you allow me. Although ASEAN is treated here as an economic community, it has diverse capabilities and geographic advantages. The ASEAN economic blueprint provides broad directions for the last 10 years and going forward, outlining strategic measures in 5 areas, namely a highly integrated and cohesive economy, a competitive, innovative and dynamic ASEAN, enhanced connectivity and sectorial cooperation, a resilient, inclusive, people-centered and dynamic ASEAN, and 5, a global ASEAN. FDI inflows to ASEAN reached more than 224 billion in the year of 2022, an increase of 6% over 2021. ASEAN's GDP at 3.6 trillion is the world's 5th largest. Just now, our financial secretary said soon we will be number 4. And we are after US, China, Japan, and Germany, of course. Many ASEAN countries have benefited from the Belt and Road Initiative projects, and ASEAN countries, because of its geographic advantages, were able to access more markets, facilitating smoother trade routes and quicker delivery times. ASEAN is the 2nd largest trading partner of Hong Kong in 2022. Hong Kong's total exports to ASEAN rose to 46.2 billion, and Hong Kong imports from ASEAN total 109.8 billion in the same year. Tourism in Hong Kong is expected to see big improvements from ASEAN, especially with visa-free travels. There will be new destinations for flights. Cathay has just announced that they will return to full capacity by January next year. And interesting to note that many of the tourists and business inbound into Hong Kong have increases coming from ASEAN countries, whereas the Western countries have seen a drop of about up to 40% in the recent years. So this is something that we hope will be, changed. Malaysia have benefited from the diversification of supply chain and is now a key producer of chips and semiconductors. ASEAN's population, as you know, 680 million, is a huge market, and that can be tapped through Malaysia, which is centrally located. And Malaysia have a variety of many skilled labor across several sectors. And one last point, ASEAN is looking forward to much better cooperation through RCEP, which is probably now the biggest trade bloc in the world. And another interesting and very significant point, the last I would like to make, is that Malaysia's Prime Minister, who is going to be the chair of ASEAN, have invited China to join the ASEAN Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, meeting in next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gankat. Excellent. In the run-up, briefly, Benjamin and I were discussing what is an international bank, what is a global bank, what is a European bank. I think it's fair to say that Standard Chartered is one of the truly global banks. So if you could perhaps share from that perspective.
Sure, thanks, Johannes. Actually, Casey just earlier mentioned, why are we here? We're here because he owns Marriott. So you're served with the best service, best food, best coffee. So thank you, Casey, for that. Anyway, I'll say a couple just as tee out of a conversation because I think the last few weeks, every single conversation, every meeting, every dinner starts with what's going to happen in the Trump 2.0 world. Right, and that's what we're all facing, and it's useful to actually rewind the clock back. What happened in the Trump 1.0 world? Lots happened, but in a nutshell, I think when Trump started, there were a few, I would say, tariff lists. The first three tariff lists, if you think about what happened, what impact, it actually impacted roughly, in today's terms, roughly 4 to 5% of China's export. So it was a bit targeted. It was not everywhere, but it was zooming on a few sectors. But the overall impact on trade, and obviously there was also a corresponding, what happened during Trump 1.0 was there was a corresponding depreciation of the RMB to offset some of the costs. So net, if you think fast forward 6 years, China remains to be a very, very core part of that export engine. Trade surplus, if anything, has expanded. That's what happened. But I think it's less about what happened at 1.0, but what our corporates, companies, manufacturers, exporters are doing today. So in speaking to Europeans, Americans, Chinese, everyone is thinking about how do you offset what may come, right? What are the possible breadth and depth of tariff? How much are we talking about? And if they were to shift, where can they shift to? Because right now, diversification is the name of the game, right? Rather than a just in time, everyone is doing a just in case, right? However, just in case is inflationary. It costs money, right? This is like insurance. This is like buying protection. Because nowhere in the world, unfortunately, can produce the quantity, the quality, and at the cost level China can. So a China plus one is never going to be enough, because China plus one isn't enough to compensate the volume of China. You need China plus two, China plus N. That's why people talk about China plus N. But the more you go, the more costly it becomes because you lose the economies of scale. You got to invest in plants depending on the sector. So that becomes a trade-off of a lot of people thinking about how do you balance the equation between getting the most efficient supply chain, delivering the best quality and the least amount of cost? Because ultimately, somehow, somewhere, someone has to pay for that cost. And the last thing you want is to have the consumer having to foot the bill, and inflation goes up, interest rate goes up, and it has a huge, profound impact on the global currency dynamics. So these are the things that we need to think about, but Hong Kong does have a role to play in how do you guide and how do you advise all the thinking behind, and how do you work also as a center, not just for supply chain, but also to manage capital, wealth flow, currency hedging. That's the role Hong Kong has to play.
Excellent, thank you. That's wonderful talking points for the discussion. Ian, you were mentioning that you've been back to Hong Kong twice now this year, I think, and from your perspective, from the Gulf, from Bahrain, what's your view on where we are today and obviously where we're going in the coming fascinating years?
Thank you, Yanis, and it's great to be here and great to be back here, which is why I'm probably rather biased towards Hong Kong. I worked here for 4 years. I worked in Tokyo for 8 years. I've been in Bahrain for 8 years, and I dealt with India for 4 years. So I've got West Asia to East Asia covered in my career, and it's wonderful to be back in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very special place, both as a gateway into China and into the mainland, and obviously as a gateway out for Chinese companies looking to go global. When I saw the video and heard what Agnes said and what Paul said, all of that resonated with me. But also it resonated with me from a Bahrain perspective, because when we talk about location, strategic location, talking about talent, talking about opportunity, that's very much Bahrain's role in the Gulf. Now, many of you in this room will know of Bahrain. The likelihood probably is that your parents and your grandparents would have known Bahrain better, because Bahrain was essentially the Dubai of the Gulf for hundreds of years until about 20 years ago. But what we're seeing, I suppose, in Bahrain now is the return of Bahrain for a simple reason. The competition in the Gulf between Saudi Arabia and the UAE means that sort of the natural selection point of saying, I've got to get into Dubai to go into the GCC no longer applies, because I think as many of you who deal with the Gulf will be aware, it's not a simple choice any longer. There are political choices to be made. Bahrain is in the very fortunate position of being best friend to Saudi Arabia and best friend to the UAE. So as our Crown Prince talks about it, we are the happy compromise, the happy consensus. And we're talking about the diversification of the economies of the Gulf. I work for the Bahrain Economic Development Board. Basically, it's the equivalent of Invest Hong Kong. But when we were set up 22 years ago, we were also a policy think tank, because the Crown Prince knew full well that at some stage, maybe in the late 2030s or 2040s, Bahrain will run out of the black stuff, will run out of oil. So in 2002, when we were set up, oil and gas represented 42% of a $10 billion economy. Roll on 22 years, oil and gas represents 16% of a $45 billion economy. So non-oil and gas represents 85% of our GDP. Financial services is the biggest sector of the economy. And fintech is now an increasingly important part of that. So diversification through technology, ICT, fintech. We've got Amazon Web Services, have got their only hyper data center in the Middle East and Africa, is in Bahrain. Citibank have just set up their latest tech hub in Bahrain. So diversification is the name of the game throughout the Gulf. There are huge investment opportunities in the region. Big difference maybe compared to 20 years ago, when the Gulf countries, through their sovereign wealth funds, were investing all around the world. They still do that, but now there's a lot more investment in country, as we heard earlier. Those of you who have not been to Riyadh for 10 years, if you go now, you'll see a very different city. Saudi Arabia is booming. Indeed, the whole of the Gulf is booming, and that represents business opportunities for Hong Kong businesses looking to move into the Middle East. And the reality is that Bahrain is Hong Kong's twin. It's your oldest friend in the Gulf. When we talk about business friendly, we are so confident about being business friendly in Bahrain, we actually put it on our name cards. When we talk about a level legal playing field, a bilingual society, pedigree, genuine, those are all things that resonate in Bahrain. So I suppose my message to all of you is, as you start to look at the Gulf, and many of you are already there, but particularly for businesses maybe who are slightly smaller, family businesses, Bahrain performs exactly the same role into the Gulf as Hong Kong does for international companies looking to move into Greater China. Looking forward to discussing more about what those specific opportunities may be for Hong Kong businesses. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, we've heard China plus X, we've heard China going more international, we've heard digitalization, we've heard sustainability, obviously, we've heard opportunities. Some of these things, I guess, are complementary. Obviously, sustainability is an issue that fundamentally is complementary. Others, perhaps, particularly, Ian, if I look in your direction, there may be an element of competition. I mean, we have Hong Kong as a financial center, obviously, not Bahrain specifically, but the Gulf states, Dubai in particular, perhaps, they are shaping up to perhaps in a way be competitive there. So who wants to go out and see what's Hong Kong's role in, should it sort of foster more of the competitive part, or should it sort of foster more of the complementary part? Where do you see the advantage the city has in that? For instance, for sustainability, one of the issues that I think we're still not discussing enough is how can we set global standards for investment in sustainability. Those could be set elsewhere too, of course. They could be in different places. They could be set possibly in the UAE. So more complementary, more bit of competition. What would benefit Hong Kong? Who wants to have a go?
I don't see Dubai as competition for Hong Kong. Dubai fulfills the role of being midway between London, Paris, and Hong Kong, Singapore. If it didn't exist, you'd have to create it. Neither Istanbul nor Mumbai, they're both regional centers, but Dubai is the only global financial center in that time zone, and it performs a particular function for the GCC. So I don't see it as being competitive. What I do think is important is for Hong Kong to develop its links with the GCC in terms of international finance. That means Dubai. Bahrain is not Dubai. It used to be, but it is no longer. So very much you need to have those links with Dubai. But in other areas, for example, in fintech, reinsurance, Islamic finance, those are areas, for example, where Bahrain has particular specialities. But I think for me, Hong Kong performs the key role as the financial center of Northeast Asia. I mean, I lived in Tokyo for 8 years. I love Japan dearly. At the end of the day, Japan, Tokyo, is not a really global city. It feels quite foreign in many ways, whereas Hong Kong does have that traditional role. And I think with, you guys went through a very long COVID period. And I was traveling into Japan in 2022 easily when it was still tough to get in here and into the mainland. It seems to me that Hong Kong and the mainland has come out of that now. So rebuilding those international links, and as we saw from the film earlier, really plugging those essential Hong Kong values of innovation, global contacts, and a very hardworking and talented population. Those to me are the key elements for Hong Kong going ahead.
Thank you. As a little follow-up on that, as we're talking about financial centers, we're talking about trade and facilitating trade. I think, Benjamin, you've already mentioned it. Digitalization in currencies, internationalization of renminbi. Now, obviously, we all know that Hong Kong has an extremely good reputation as a financial center. It is the world's biggest offshore renminbi trading center. Where do you see that going? What's the time frame you see there? And then maybe as a follow-up, perhaps from Dee, do you actually see in day-to-day, you've set up operations in Vietnam, are you already seeing, or Gang Kai, in actual trade, are you seeing the usage of renminbi increasing? But maybe kick off with you, Benjamin.
Sure, it's two components of it. One is, if you think about the whole world flow, used to be the biggest factory of the world shipping directly, one Trans-Pacific to US, the other one to Europe. Now it's going to detour, detouring to the global south before it hits the west. And when the increasing, if you think about becomes a greater proportion of world trade being in south-south trade. Okay, that's what's phenomenal. 30 years ago, south-south trade accounted for around 5% of world trade. Today it's 20 and rising extremely fast. In a south-south trade environment, the propensity or the willingness to use RMB has gone up. It's very different from north-north trade. Right? Northern trade is dollar denominated. South-south trade has a lot more propensity to use because of the connectivity between China and the rest of the world. So you see that shift. That does not mean de-dollarization. I don't think the dollar will be replaced in that regard, but there will be increasing process of diversification as a dollar plus one mode in the usage of currency in trade. Okay, so trade now, if you go to SWIFT, it's around now the fourth largest in terms of volume used payments. It's around 4.6%. Okay, it's on the rise, but it's not going to change entirely the whole predominance in terms of usage of dollar. That's one, okay? Now, then you talk about trade. Trade is slightly different things. Trade remains to be the most paper-based mode. You see a huge amount of digitization around the world in payments and processing and credit card application, you name it. But trade is fundamentally, I'm sure Dee will agree, right? Everything that deals with the trade is very, very paper-based. And therein lies the inefficiency that, to the extent digitization can help remove paperwork, streamline processes, it will be significantly helpful. Now, there's more to it. It's not just about cost. The best thing for digitization is to find a way to connect the biggest buyer, could be US, could be European, with the smallest SME. That is financial inclusion. If you can find a way to link that through digitization, through blockchain, through deep tier supply chain financing, you can actually enable the smallest of MSMEs to have better access to financing at a cheaper rate. And that's what banks need to do, to use digitization, use blockchain technology to help improve that whole notion, because SMEs in particular in the global south are emerging markets. They currently are a bit excluded from it. There's a huge trade finance gap globally between the money that they need versus the supply that they get. Hopefully digitization can bridge that gap.
So, one of my early internships when I was in college was at Morgan Stanley. And after 8 weeks, I learned that I didn't really like Excel and numbers all that much. So, right now we're talking about digitization, we're talking about moving money, how we make money. But really what I do is I make things, right? And I sell things. So one of the questions, I think what we've been talking about here is how to create efficiencies or, what does it mean? Ben said how to pay for the cost of something. But really the way I think about what I do is how do I create value, right? And I would say that that's what my family, whether it's my mother or my father, they've always been here attempting to create value. So today I build brands. Right, my father, he imported brands, Western luxury goods, into Hong Kong and sold them. My mother, she took orders from Western middle market and then later upper market brands, took the instructions of what to do, and then made them and sold them to them. Where I see where we are in the world today is we are the ones who must create the brands. We are the ones who must create the decisions, the ideas, and the products for the new world. So when I walk around, I've spent a lot of time in ASEAN and in the Middle East. I've gone to a lot of malls recently. And in the Middle East, you see a lot of Western brands. In ASEAN, though, you see a lot more brands from Asia, whether they're from Korea, from China, or even from Singapore and Thailand, or locally, say the Philippines will have Filipino brands, et cetera. And I think the question we really need to ask going forward is not just how we may be a connector in terms of the flows of capital, but having attached and addressed these flows, what it means for Hong Kong to be at the center of creation of value for products and goods beyond that. And the reason I think Hong Kong is so strong in this is because we are naturally global. So I would say, most people in Hong Kong, local people, are quite bilingual, right? If you look at our education system, it starts in Chinese and ends in English. And that's compulsory education. If you look around, people navigate a home which is probably quite Confucian with a city that is very cosmopolitan and international. And right now, the stories that we are being told are Western. I think I don't know how many of you have followed Kevin Young's arts, culture, and creative industries development, paper which came out a few days ago. He talks a lot about the creative industries, and in particular, the development of Chinese cultural arts, cultures, and products. I think it's important for Hong Kong to tap that as a market, but also to work with a legacy that we know, a culture that we know, as a first step to creating our own stories and to creating our own IPs. That's how we learn to be able to work with the cultures of others, whether they are batik in Southeast Asia, right? The stories, I went to the Middle East several times this year and I saw a lot of art. I was so impressed with what I saw at the Diriyah Biennial, which was held in Riyadh and opened in February. Contemporary art from a much more Islamic perspective, something that we have never considered here before, but that opens up an entire new world of understanding how to speak to people, how to communicate with people, and how to create products that are not from others to us to then just talk about to our, to the people here or whomever, what market we serve. But really the question is, how do we move up? How does Hong Kong and the businesses in Hong Kong, how do we jump to the next step? Because we can attach ourselves, right? We can have the links, but then what? And so I think only with this level of communication, with this type of a population who's open-minded, who knows how to navigate difference, will we have the chance to become a leader in tomorrow's world. And so, I want to close this little segment with something I noticed, which is I'm probably 10 to 20 years younger than everybody on this stage. And I think, what that means is I just have a little bit of a different point of view. I'm a little less used to the world as it is because I've lived in it not as long. And so perhaps I have a little bit more vision for what might be because of the level of changes that I've seen within my lifetime. So, yeah, I think it's actually a super exciting time. I think, we've heard already how many places there are opportunities, but I wanted to add why I thought Hong Kong had the ability to be the one to leverage this, not just, it seems to say, oh, we're going to connect everybody, but then what, right? So I think it's a really exciting time, and I think we're in exactly the right place to be playing with this.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And I like... I like your point about ASEAN. When you visited, you saw a lot of Asian brands. Now, similarly, I think ASEAN is very immersed into Hong Kong's economy. Just for example, we are sitting here in Pacific Place. My partner, Guy Bradley from Swire. All the 3 hotels here, Shangri-La, Conrad, and JW Marriott, are principally owned by ASEAN investors, either Malaysian or Singaporeans, right? And the good thing about ASEAN is that we understand Hong Kong extremely well. We see a lot of Hong Kong TV. We like Hong Kong food. And the energy and the sparkle that Hong Kong produces actually drives a lot of ASEAN to come into Hong Kong, either for business, but originally, if they come as a tourist. And we see, as I just mentioned earlier, that ASEAN and Asian countries are now increasingly the most important tourists and business travelers to Hong Kong and GBA as well. So we think the center of gravity, as we see today, definitely is shifting into this particular area. And we are looking forward to this in the continuing times. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Maybe as a follow-up, Dee, on what we are saying, building brands. I mean, clearly I think some of that is already happening at another point of the market. We've got Shein as a massive, obviously, success story in terms of fashion, going global, coming maybe perhaps also with some issues in terms of sustainability and fast fashion. You're talking about moving up market. What I wonder, as the quintessential old white man in this room and the one who has no hair, who will you be when you see you're building the brand, you're building your own story? Do you see that targeted towards Asians in Asia, or do you actually also see that you're targeting Europe, the US, other places? Where do you see that playing out?
I believe in Asia for Asia. I think, it's very easy. I think I think the reason the West has been so good for us is because they have a lot of money, right? And so you can sell something, like what they're willing to pay is higher than what other places are willing to pay. So Four Seasons in London is $1,000 a night. Four Seasons in Hong Kong is 5,000 Hong Kong a night. Four Seasons in Bangkok is 3,000 Hong Kong dollars a night, right? That being said, so it's just easier to sell to a place that is willing to pay you more. You can screw up more, you can spend more money on things, you can get it to a higher level. But the thing is, the reason I think Asia is exciting is because there's so much untapped about it, and there's just so much growth potential. And when there's so much growth potential, there's so many different areas in the market that you can tap, and so many different ways and business models that you can explore. I think, right now we look at the world of retail, and we're all talking about shine and fast fashion and quick supply chain, and how much, it's super disruptive because it's just so cheap. And everybody just, the idea, I think the world and capitalism pushes us to this desire for more, right? And what do you get with shine? More. Just more. Give me 10 pairs of pants. Just buy every single size. I'm never giving them back. It's fine. But the question, I think, as we watch places develop, and that's what we're seeing in ASEAN, is that people don't just want more, they want better. And so I think that's what I look to navigate through what we're bringing to the market, is this desire to work with people towards better, and the question of better being not just better in terms of quality, better in terms of being able to show you and to work with you what we collectively look like and aspire to, but also better for the world, right? Because what is the model that is going to allow us to survive the next changes in, whether it's geopolitics, climate, or just, what is the word, poly-crisis? Like, what is going to allow us to survive, and being able to push back against the obvious forces that just drive growth at all costs, but that don't necessarily consider the long game? I mean, that is what I look at, and that's why I look to ASEAN.
Thank you. That was pretty clear.
There's a build. I enjoyed what both Casey and Dia saying, particularly made in Asia for Asia, because the last, 30, 40 years has been running at a model of made in Asia for the West. Okay, and I think this will start to pivot, particularly as Asia becomes of an increasing population that is going through from, on average, from a relatively lower income bracket to a middle and some to a high. When that happens, the consumption increase is exponential. And hence that made in Asia for the West will continue, but will increasingly shift towards made in Asia for Asia. The question is, can you not just be made in Asia, but also be created? Your value add, your branding, do we see enough of that value add creation in Asia, tuning to the preferences and the tastes and likes of Asians? Not yet, not yet. But there's one point I would disagree with you, Dee, just for the sake of it, is connection is value add. In the growing world of fragmentation, in the growing world of one not trusting the other, that bridge is value add. And this is where Hong Kong has got to play that role. The bridge has been east-west, but I think the pivot, flow-wise, goes from north-south. So we need to do this bit, but increasingly we do this bit because of the south-south trade, and that is the role how adaptive Hong Kong can be, because we need to focus on what are the secular trends to come, and focus on extracting and providing a value add to those who need to be connected.
I actually agree with you. So when I say South Asia for Asia, let me preface that I do not think that we can survive without being fully international. So, I talk about my mom, my dad, the old businesses taking information this way and disseminating it this way. Right now, my biggest challenge is building a design team. And do you know how I do it? I do it by capacity building with international consultants here to train my team. Right? This is not a question of just we're just going to go this way. No, it's not that at all. Hong Kong's distinctive because we are at a level where we've been trained from every direction. And if we don't continue to learn from the best of the best, and I don't think it matters, where that best is, right? So it's not like I only want to learn from America. Right now, you could argue maybe music, you should look to K-pop, right? You shouldn't look to just the US and what they're doing in hip-hop. I think it's about learning from global players who are excellent and being connected to them through whatever means we have so that we can further step up the value chain and bring things to. Again, my view is the best markets going forward will be ASEAN, but everywhere. And I don't close off the idea that I would sell my brands into the US or into Europe or one day into Africa and South America. They're just farther off, and it's easier to work with ASEAN first.
And I think, looking across Asia, I've always believed that the future is very Asian. There is certainly, the pivot isn't happening now, the pivot has been happening. When people in London say, isn't India doing well or whatever, I say, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're still at the bottom left-hand corner of the chart when it comes to Asian growth. But when I look across Asia, certainly sitting in Bahrain, to me, there are only two major international centers in Asia. One is Hong Kong, and one is Singapore. You both perform slightly different functions, but at the end of the day, Hong Kong bleeds global. And that, as Ben has said, that connection is incredibly important because, as we will see, a lot more business coming in from the West into Asia. You have that unique position. Your USP is you're global. I've traveled all over Asia. I said earlier, I love Japan. I love Tokyo. Tokyo's not global. So when people are looking to come into this region, it seems to me that Hong Kong is the perfect place for them to land in the region if they're looking at Northeast Asia. Obviously, India is only 3.5 hours flight from Bahrain. We talk, for example, some of the malls that you're talking about be a lot of Indian brands in the Gulf. But at the end of the day, India isn't very global. Notwithstanding the fact that 1 in 3 CEOs of Silicon Valley companies are non-resident NRIs, non-resident Indians, India isn't actually very global compared with, let's say, Hong Kong or Singapore. So you have huge advantages. But Dee, you're absolutely right. What does that mean? How do you then transform your advantages into real opportunities for the future? I'm optimistic about Hong Kong because Hong Kong has always had to reinvent itself. You've adapted. They say small is beautiful. Not quite right in Bahrain, because small isn't beautiful when your hydrocarbon footprint is 75 kilometers by 25 kilometers and your neighbors are far, far larger. But I do think that small countries, small economies have to be agile. You have to be innovative to keep up with the big neighbors. And I think that is one of Hong Kong's huge advantages. But connectivity, you've got the connections, use the connections, don't be backward or shy. And in fact, in an audience like this, I've never known Hong Kongers to be backward or shy, but you've really got to leverage your connections to get back up there. Looking from Bahrain, it'd be fair to say over the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of people in the Gulf saying, well, Singapore's doing so well now, it's taken some of Hong Kong's business. Get back out there. That's why it's great to be here today. It's great to have had the General Chamber of Commerce in Bahrain, I think, twice this year already. Get out there. Push the Hong Kong brand, push the Hong Kong name.
On a slightly, there's one thing we have not maybe touched on quite that much, and it brings me back to something you, Dee, said. Europeans have money. Usually money and a desire to be more sustainable, they tend to correlate positively. Now, that's one thing where I'd like to take, maybe Benjamin, maybe how do we integrate sustainability and the desire to make this perhaps a more Asian world, but also a more sustainable world? How do we integrate Europe perhaps into that? And that, more broadly speaking, obviously, as a German, I need to sort of take a little bit of a side for Germany. Do we triangulate in Hong Kong, Europe, the Gulf states, and Asia, or is it basically between you guys, Malaysia, Bahrain? Are you going to sort of form a new club of friends? Just some thoughts on that, coupled with that idea of sustainability, perhaps, and capital flows.
Very big topic, very difficult to crack. Because the world's sustainability battle will have to be fought in the East. It will have to be fought in Asia, because this is where the carbon footprint, because that's where the manufacturing is. The world's sustainability brains right now are concentrated in Europe. Right? We have the problem. We don't have as much of that specialty knowledge, so we need to find a way to partner it. Sustainability costs money, and that's why we need to find ways to channel, both through public-private investors, connect the dots, and this is where, and you also have to develop standards via which deals are being done. I don't know if you have read a couple of days ago, this is on FT, and I do think the world needs to be a little bit more together, because they are on this subject, because I think this was the subject of matter of the most important thing 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. I think it has gone down a little bit, because I think we are reaching closer to the tipping point of a few very irreversible problems. The melting of Greenland, the death of all coral reefs, the melting of all the permafrosts and the release of carbon, and the dying of some of the Labrador currents. These, once you pass that tipping point, it's going to shoot up like that. And if we don't face the problem together and find a solution to it, we all have to suffer, and our next generation will have to suffer.
Thank you.
Guangkai, perhaps some thoughts from you on does Malaysia rely in any way on Europe for sustainability or?
For the time being, I think climate change, for example, is a problem for ASEAN countries. We have more vibrant and terrible earthquakes and typhoons and so on. And I don't think the West will be able to help on that. This is a universal problem, I think, climate change. And sustainability is something all countries, including ASEAN, is totally involved. But it takes great courage and a lot of determination. We have many businesses affected by floods, landslides in ASEAN countries. And it is quite terrible to see, even around the world, we have these problems. So this is something that all of us, not only sitting in this room, but I think everywhere, should be fully aware and make conscious efforts. And from our side, as a Chamber of Commerce, every time we go everywhere, and every time we have an event, an occasion, this is behind our mind, and we will propagate this sustainability issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the run-up of speaking with you, one of you made a comment that, if you allow me, I'd like to pick that up. It's a little bit of a curveball. One of you said, language is important, thinking is important. For Hong Kong, what does that actually mean? How do we make sure that in Hong Kong, language and thinking remain important drivers of what we're all doing together? It's not an easy one, but somebody wants to. Bit scared?
Supposedly, I said that in a call that we had before this. And honestly, I will say, I actually don't remember saying it. But I will have a go at trying to decipher what I said on that call about a week ago. I mean, I think, Hong Kong needs, for Hong Kong to have the brightest future possible, I think language and being able to speak everybody's languages is really important. I think the conversation we actually had on the phone was not just about English, but preferably also about other languages. So, it's great that there is a global language today, which is English, but the difficulty is, of course, when we're all speaking in our second language, our ability to understand each other is greatly harpered. So, if nothing else, English is deathly important for Hong Kong to remain, at the top of its game. But preferably, if people have time, being able to learn and engage with different people from different places in their local languages is even more wonderful. I think that this idea about thinking, right, and it goes back, I spoke about my mom and my dad, both of them in many ways, their businesses were built on order taking. And of course they had to think. They had to think about how to execute these orders properly, efficiently. But really the level of thinking about how to move forward was different from the challenges and the thinking required that is needed today. So, one of the things, I'm going to be using this word thinking a lot, but one of the things that's been percolating in my mind is just around general development, right? So I was in Indonesia and they talked about free school lunch and they talked about needing to raise the number of IQ points in the general population so that they'd be able to capture the demographic dividend that they will win over the next 20, 30, 50 years. So that's one level of development. If you look at China and how it's moved from rural into the cities and into factories and then into service industries and then into science, technology, IT, all sorts of innovation, right? That's another level and set of developments. And I think in Hong Kong, we really need to think about what it means for us as an ecosystem to get to the next level, and specifically what type of levels of thinking is required for each person within this chain and at every level, so that we can elevate our abilities as we move forward. It's a super big question. I studied philosophy.
No, but thank you very much for picking up on that. That, again, it is not an easy one. I'm mindful of the time. Perhaps sort of closing thoughts. 5 years from now, just maybe as a thought experiment, will there be place for a Hong Kong school in the places that you represent, or will there, alternatively, will there be a place for a Malaysian school in Hong Kong, a Bahrain school? How do you see, where do you see Hong Kong 5 years from now? Exporting more, importing more talent, people, and thinking. But again, mindful of the time, just sort of as a closing wrap-up. Maybe starting with you.
Thank you, John. The Malaysian community had tried to open a school in Hong Kong. Only one problem: we can't find a piece of land to build a school. We are not so lucky. We are not so lucky like Singapore. They have an international school that's been running for a long time. I think in today's world, with the accessibility of the internet and the new technology and AI, the school can be anywhere. In fact, in Malaysia, there are many international schools, including those from UK, because English is a very important language that Malaysia attests to. And also Chinese universities. The Xiamen University is in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. Hong Kong is fortunate, and also thanks to Hong Kong government, they allow and they approve a lot of ASEAN students to come to Hong Kong, and they provide scholarships. And admiration for Hong Kong government, because these scholarships are without conditions. This is something that all of us admire. And there are many, many thousands of students already in Hong Kong, and they are working in Hong Kong and also helping the community in Hong Kong very much, which Maychem is very much part of it. That's our thinking. And going forward, I think there will be possibility of schools on either side when the community becomes larger. Thank you.
I just want to agree with what Casey said. Asia is one little four-letter word, but it cuts across a tapestry of different culture, different religion, all sorts of different background. And it's flows becoming increasingly intra-Asia. Does Asia actually, or does Hong Kong understand Asia well enough? And part of the understanding has got to be done via exchanges of talent. I was actually early this week attending, I was on an advisory council of one of the universities, and because the quota of maximum 20% allotted to international or non-Hong Kong-based students had now increased to 40. My biggest and strongest encouragement is you bring a cross-section of talents, not just by grades, but just by virtue of diversifying that base, because students, all of us, when we go to college, we learn from one another. The more different type of spectrum we have, the more we learn. And that's something Hong Kong should try to diversify, bringing in talents from all around the world.
In Bahrain, we've got American schools, British schools, German schools, French schools, Indian schools, but no Chinese school. Looking ahead 5 years, I'd like to see Hong Kong more visible in the Gulf. It's not really very visible compared with other parts of East and Southeast and South Asia. And I think if Hong Kong wants a slice of the Gulf economic boom pie, Hong Kong needs to be more visible there. So Hong Kong is global, but maybe not as global as it should be in the Gulf. That's what I'd like to see in 5 years' time.
I think the question is not will there be Hong Kong schools, but what should Hong Kong schools look like? And I think Hong Kong schools right now are based on a traditional education system that are actually a wonderful way to drive discipline, right, and a desire to compete. So if, I look at some of my Chinese colleagues, and they're really aggressive. And you know why? It's because if you go through this education system, by the time you get to the top, you're hungry and you're really good because you didn't get that far without being naturally talented and working exceptionally hard. Now, I actually think that the Hong Kong schools should therefore be different. So in the same way, right, if you look at music, the best virtuosos or soloists, they're gonna come from China because, again, they're just so hardcore, right? But in Hong Kong, we are a much more open system. Like this idea of everybody being bilingual, to do that, you're balancing values, you're balancing ideas. And I think the question we should ask is, in the next 5 years, how should we build a prototypical Hong Kong school for the future where people are engaged in a culture of creativity, innovation, excellence, and learning skills through these means, not just learning skills as a mode towards being able to execute them further, because the world is changing faster than we know. Technology is going to change, how we interact. And if we don't create the system by which we can adapt and our children and young people can adapt, we're not going to be differentiated, so we may as well take the leap now.
Thank you so much. You've been an absolutely wonderful panel. I thought there was an extremely lively discussion. I think we're just about on time, reasonably. Now it's beginning to flash. That's probably a bad sign. And thank you very, very much for that lively discussion. And enjoy.
So thank